Directors, May 1st, 2024. First, I want to start to acknowledge that we passed the budget last night. There's a lot of mixed feelings around that process, but I know there was a lot of hard work, and I'm glad that the district is in a position where we can move forward with the school year next year at funding levels that are adequate. But I also know that for this community, in particular Roxbury, it has come with a lot of hurt and feelings of uncertainty. I know there's been a lot of great work done in the last few weeks with the transition committee to try to make the move of elementary students to UES as smooth as possible, and I think everyone is feeling very confident that we can do that in a way that meets the students and families' needs and gives them a great educational experience there. But I also know that there is a lot of hurt and uncertainty, and I think no one on the board wanted to move forward with this. I also want to acknowledge I had a contentious exchange with a Roxbury resident at the previous meeting. That in no way is a reflection of frustrations I have in the Roxbury community or any dismissal. The concerns of the community, I apologize if any of it came across that way. I should not have let frustration show through. They were not directed at concerns expressed having a conversation with, so I just want to make that clear. And again, just thank you for all the hard work. There were a lot of hours put in. I know that everyone feels both relieved that we're not in the position many districts are in. I think very frustrated with what the state did to district to put us in this position. And I think we're all unified in our desire to make sure that the changes that this budget brought about happen in a way to meet our educational goals. The first order of business is public comment. If anyone would like to speak in the room or online, please do so. Again, this is a time for the board to listen. Just because we don't respond in real time does not mean that we're not taking the concerns very seriously, and that they are not part of our deliberative process and our decision-making process. And also, if you don't feel comfortable or don't have time to speak at public comment, you can always email the board at schoolboard@mpbs.et.org. So if anyone in the room would like to speak, please do, and then we'll go online. Dave, and please just step up to
Am I on the agenda for facilities?
You are not on the agenda, but you're certainly welcome to be to speak at public comment.
Everybody wanted that. Be on there. Can I step up to the
Yeah, of course. Yeah, well, please do.
First, I want to say a couple things, and it may sound, well, first thing I'd like to say is to thank, I don't know, Mrs. I don't know what your title is, okay? But thank you for your letter. I'm going to put it in a frame and put it on the wall next to my desk. I consider it a badge of honor. Now, the things that I want to talk to you about are, and don't laugh because this is serious, okay? Are you going to put a porta potty on that bus? That's what I want to know. You know, you got vibrations going on. Are you going to give them kidney belts like they used to use in motorcycles, or what are you going to do to stop that problem? Okay, enough said on that. Up north, I'm told by a guy I met at the State House when I was there, they're traveling 40 some odd miles one way to school. Can you imagine 80 miles a day for a kid going to school, first, second, third graders? It's ludicrous. Secondly, enough said on that subject. My real big worry is, besides that they're going to get treated like hicks from the sticks. You're clashing two cultures together, and I don't think it's going to be good on the Roxbury kids. Okay? Enough said about that. Now we'll get down to the heart of the problem. There's a bunch of problem. I've been trying for 2 years, talk to him, talk to the other guys about getting the gutter cleaned. And it's filled up, and you can see the rot coming down the outside the building if you want to go and look at it. I guess I'm a self-appointed committee of one. Okay. I repair barns for a living, the barn doctor, that's my title. I do heavy timber, post and beam work, and I do not want to fix this building again. Okay. Thereby, we have a man in town that has a man lift that can look at it. He refuses to do it while you own the building. He's a selectman. They understand. They don't agree, but they understand what I'm doing here tonight. I'm here tonight to demand that building back. And I'm here to tell you that Ms. or whatever Bonesteel was right. I hope you didn't think that I would do anything while the school was in session. Okay? I love the kids. I like living across the street from them and listening to them talk with their parents when they go home. You know, my kids are in their 20s. Okay? I fully intend this summer, if we don't get the building back, I fully intend this summer to break into this building. And what I will do the first thing when I get in this building is I will go to the phone and call the state police and tell them I'm in the building. I want to be arrested. I want to be taken away from this. I want all the bad publicity on you we can get. The people of this town already hate you for what you did. We need to have our school back for several reasons. One of which, you understand my statement that I want to do a different school there. But the main reason is I don't want to have to fix this building again. I didn't fix it in the first place. Steve Twombly did. And he mixed the metaphors. He used plywood, gussets, instead of heavy timber, I believe, where the rafters meet the plate or meet the cross tie. Okay? I haven't seen it in a bunch of years. I was there when they did it. I was all over this building when it was renovated in the 80s. I've tried many times to talk to this gentleman here and to talk to the other guys about getting that gutter clean. And it doesn't ever happen. It's still there. So I'm not going to let it sit another winter. Whatever I got to do, I got to do. If I got to go to jail, no problem. Not a problem with me at all. What I fully intend to do is take over the building in the middle of summer sometime and chain you out. We don't want you here. We don't want. I never wanted anything to do with Montpelier anyway. We wanted U32. Everybody that thrived in this school went to U32 when they couldn't handle it here or Montpelier or Northfield, including Ben Pincus. He got in trouble in Northfield and had to go to U32. Nobody ever went to Montpelier. We got stuffed into Montpelier by the state. Our guys didn't give us any opportunity to go anywhere else because the state didn't give them any opportunity because they probably needed more for the red in Montpelier. More people, more towns for the red. Why wouldn't you get enough? Because it's the highest tax town in central Vermont, probably. My theories alone don't know. Okay? But I never wanted to be with Montpelier. We always wanted to be with U32. We were denied that. And it wasn't just me alone wanting to go to U32. Like I said, every kid that thrived from here that went to another school went to U32 and made out great there. But we were not allowed. We were told, I assume they were not lying to us. We were told that we could not go to U32, that we had to go to Montpelier. It's not a right fit for us, you know? Never was and never will be. I don't know what else I can say to you, you know, except that I will call the police immediately and let them know that I've taken over the building. We want this building back. Or I want this building back. The selectmen know what I'm doing. They haven't said one way or the other. Okay? I don't think they like what I'm doing. I don't care whether they like it or not. We're in a situation where nobody understands what the hell is going on financially. We're at a tipping point, in my opinion. And we're also at a point where assholes like me have to take charge and do whatever has to be done. Because if we wait for you people to do it, you're too good to be able to do it, too goody shoes to whatever the deal is. You can't seem to get it done. Neither can the legislature. Look where we are. I mean, it's probably my own. I mean, I believe there's global change. Don't get me wrong. But why the hell should we waste money on global warming or any of that crap when we can put it into education? Talk to the legislature. You don't get nowhere. But I am in the hopes that I had a little bit of success. She come out of committee 2 to 3. Okay. They had my information that you have at the committee, and I talked to them. The old gentleman says, don't go to jail. The rest of them were very nice and very kind to hear me. I believe that I'm blessed to be in a state where I can walk in to the education committee of the legislature and be heard. You know, I don't think you can do that in a lot of states. I really don't. One more thing I have to say to you people, and to a lot of people that come here, I don't think they understand what it's like living in the country. It's a whole different ball of wax than living in the city. And for example, they let their dogs run loose. They don't think there's a leash here, leash law. What happens is they chase deer and kill them. I mean, I've seen dogs this tall, little tiny guys chase deer and run them down till the deer. I mean, I've seen a dog chewing on a deer, crying like a baby, and I shot the deer. Should have shot the dog. I saved one bullet for the dog. I missed him. Okay. Game wardens didn't like it, but they understood what I was doing. If you want to look it up, you'll probably find a bunch of history on me. Nothing seriously criminal, but definitely forceful. And I mean what I say. I will take over the school. And a lot of times I maybe say we, yeah, I got a mouse in my pocket. I don't know what anybody feels here except what they echoed at town meeting or what they hands up at town meeting about wanting to keep a school here. One last thing. Nothing to do with you guys, but to do with the state. I seriously believe, and I haven't yet gone through the formal process, but I've asked the Bill Scotts, who I know slightly. He got me a meeting once with a legislative council. Anyway, I've asked him, not officially on paper, but I'm going to follow it up, to be on the committee if he's going to do a committee on future school funding. That's what he said on TV. Don't know if he's going to do it or not, but if he's going to do it, I can bring a low income perspective. One last thing I want to say to you. I talked to Ben Pincus and asked him this question. I might ask you the same question, but whatever. I talked to Hooper, my legislator, one of them, and I said to him, pardon me? Oh, okay. I said to him, this is the problem. You have a budget that needs to be cut. You have two qualified people to do it. One that's rich like you and one that's poor. Which one do you send? You can only send one. They both said to me, you send the poor. Well, what I said to my legislature, that's your problem. You got nobody here that's poor. Everybody up there is doing pretty well in their life. We live cutting a budget every day. I had to give up my phone, which I lost, which is just as well. I got my other one coming in, my barn doctor fund coming in. But I lost my phone because I didn't have enough money to pay for my mortgage, not my mortgage, my taxes and my power bill. And I couldn't pay the phone bill. So they took the phone away. And because my ex owed a lot of money on the phone, it was her grandmother's phone, they won't renew it, but that's okay. I'm going back to my barn doctor phone because I have a business and it's better that I have the business phone, but I've had that one for many years because it was what we had. It was her grandmother's phone. So that'll tell you that I do know how to make choices to survive with no money. And that's what needs to be done here, whether you realize it or not. Maybe not. I don't know. We've had this problem before where budgets got voted down. So the question is that just a once in a while thing, or are we cycling up to where we're at the taxing limit of the public in this state? And that's what I believe. I believe we're getting near the taxing limit, and that's why they're moaning and groaning and crying. Well, all those people that did all the crying over this school budget closing and school closing, none of them stepped up to do anything. My proposal is junk compared to the brains of a lot of you people, but nobody stepped up to do anything, any other kind of proposal to try and keep school going here. It's more than just a school. Last thing for sure. It's more than just a school, it's a town. And you're ripping apart a town. I realize it's not your fault. I realize you're trying to do the best you can, but you can't blame us for hating you because of it. We lost our school. We lost everything, you know, and now we don't know what's going to happen with the building, whether it's going to rot or get further in trouble. So I'm here to bitch and moan about it. And one last thing, I would like what you write down that I'm saying. I would love a copy of that because I wanted to be on the agenda. Okay. And write it as colloquially as you like, you know, not a problem. Done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Anything you want to say to me?
Yeah, just thank you. No, we're listening.
Well, you can beat up on me more than that. I can take it.
Nope. No, we appreciate the input. Thank you.
Nothing? No comments from anybody? No comments?
Yeah, I got a comment. You're using up everybody's time.
Okay. Done. Simple.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I just, oh my God, there's a microphone. Come to Roxbury, you get a microphone. Unbelievable. No, I just wanted to say that I hope you're satisfied. I hope the board chair and the superintendent, after all their scheming and misinformation, have been successful in stealing our school, driving a stake through the heart of it. I live next door. We have the greenhouse across the road. We were talking today or yesterday with a young couple, and we just realized how quiet it's going to be in the village now. It's going to be, I mean, the heart is gone, will be gone. And I just hope that you five, actually only a couple of them are here, that voted for closing our school are really proud of yourselves. This didn't have to happen. You refused to put a budget out there that included Roxbury for 1.89%. I'm very certain that people in Montpelier would have covered it. But you had your motives. Your motives were to infill your student needs in UES. Like somebody pointed out to me the other day, it wasn't long ago you took our fifth and sixth graders away. So that reduced our numbers. So this has been a long time process for you folks. And I hope you're proud of yourselves. I really do.
Anyone else? Anyone online?
And there's nobody from the public online.
No, there's nobody online. All right. Thank you all. The next item is the consent agenda. The consent agenda is where we approve.
Oh, wait, Nancy Bruce raised her hand. I'm sorry. She just raised her hand.
Nancy? Sorry.
Can you hear me? Okay. Um, I want to acknowledge the incredible amount of motion and challenge and difficulty and loss and grief and frustration and anger. And I want to thank all of you for your hard work. I'm sure no one anticipated this situation that many districts and towns are facing. So I know I've been a critic, hopefully a informative one, but thank you all for this extraordinary time and all that you had to work with and deal with under the time schedule that you had. And regardless of how I feel about the decisions, I really just want to acknowledge all of you and thank you for what you've done and are doing in the best interest of the voters. I know it's really hard. I'm still sort of kind of processing the previous comments, but I'll be brief. I know you have a long agenda. I'll just end by saying really thank you for your public service in such a really hard time. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. We appreciate it.
Who was that? What was her name?
Nancy Bruce. And that's it. So next order of business is the consent agenda. This is where we approve things that are kind of pro forma that don't need discussion, like minutes of former meetings, teacher contracts, etc. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Any discussion or questions about the consent agenda? Tim?
The authorization for chair to sign warrants. Can you just speak to that just a minute? Is there like a up to a certain amount, or is that general, or how? Just explain that.
That's basically what we need for payroll, and the chair or vice chair needs to sign it every, is it week or 2 weeks?
Well, you approve them in the consent agenda, and then once they're approved, the
board or vice chair signs them, and
So
that
it's for warrants approved.
Mhm.
by the
Yeah.
board.
Mhm.
yeah, and it allows.
It's pro forma. You'll see it on
Pro forma,
the consent agenda every time this year around this time.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I wonder if
Kristen?
anybody from the finance committee would just be willing to give like a brief.
Oh, thank you. We forgot to put that on the agenda.
Did you guys meet the?
Yeah, we
Oh,
just
okay.
forgot to put the the kind of approved third quarter
Oh,
report.
well,
Yeah.
it's in the consent agenda. I
Oh, is
didn't,
it?
it
Okay.
is, yeah, but I didn't, if anybody from the finance committee is willing to just give a update.
Jake is the ranking member. Do you want to give an update of the third quarter report that you all just heard?
Any like, major takeaways, things that you think we should be aware of?
Yeah. If Tim is allowed, he can.
Yeah, jump in,
Chime
of
in.
course.
I mean, the major takeaways to me that we were going over with Christina, the status of the different budget line items through the third quarter. And, there are normal variances that had explanations, but overall, things were on track. There's a few unfilled positions that, we're trying to fill, and a couple that we may not try to fill this fiscal year. And then recovering some money from FEMA has been logistically challenging, but we expect it to happen eventually related to the flood damage. And Tim, what else did?
The recoveries from insurance seem to be going well. The non-FEMA piece, the insurance seems to be coming in well and as expected is I think a takeaway. And spoke a little bit about the sort of history of the capital fund and what the transfer has been, and looked at sort of a general trend to increase modestly in the next couple of years by like 10,000 years. I think the running assumption. My first point is,
Thank you.
but seemed generally on track and didn't seem to be any major surprises.
Thank you, Morgan. Tim's microphone has kind of squeaked, so I don't know if there's a bug in it or not, but yeah. Any more questions on the consent agenda? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Now we are on to the facilities master plan, and if people remember, what seems like a few years ago now, but I think it was just last fall, we hired Truex in the wake of particularly the flooding damage. I think was kind of the big motivation for it, to do a facilities examination and put together a report kind of detailing the state of our facilities and some possible options for the future. So yes, so please come up, and also I read the executive summary in detail and skimmed through the report. It's an excellent piece of work. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And guys, just so you know, I'm gonna share it online. You can share it for the people here, but I got it for the Zoom screen. Oh, you're fine. I can follow you. So I can introduce, if you haven't met already, we have David, Cam, and Kevin, not in that order. Kevin, David, Cam in order, looking at them. Kevin is from Engineering Adventures and did a lot of the climatology and engineering kind of piece in this report. And Dave and Cam are from Truex Collins, the architectural piece.
Is there any way to not dim or turn, like, is it all on or all off? Just
turn the lights. I mean, we've got to turn on natural lights.
yeah. Could we try turning some of the lights?
Architects
Whoa.
need to be perfect.
That's right. You're lucky we didn't rearrange the furniture, because that's been known to happen too. Okay, well, thank you all, and we're going to give a very high level overview of the master plan, kind of an executive summary of the executive summary, and then we'll leave time for questions at the end. Just a brief introduction. Truex Collins is an architecture and interior design firm in Burlington. We were founded in 1968. I like to say I started when I was 7. We have a staff of 38, and Cam and I work a lot on the K through 12 schools. We do schools in all over Vermont, and we even do some international schools, which we're hoping to get Libby to help us on.
I've volunteered my time.
Yeah,
to
right.
be an educational consultant.
How's your Uzbek?
Yeah.
Not languages. School.
And joining us is Kevin Warden from Engineering Ventures. You want to tell us a little bit about?
Sure. Yeah, we're based in Burlington. We've worked with David and Cam and Truex for the past 30 years that we've been around, and certainly specialize in K through 12, but also projects that in the past several years, unfortunately, have had climate resiliency issues. This is one that you're all familiar with in Waterbury. And here, after Irene, we worked with the state to evaluate the site, remove 22 buildings, keep the state at the location, and flood-proof the historic buildings and add a new building. And fortunately, it weathered very well in July. Many other buildings around the state and projects like the Target in West Leb that was done in the floodplain. So a lot of experience around that. We do civil and structural engineering.
So I just wanted to give a little overview of the of our presentation. We're going to, as I said, do an executive summary of the executive summary, and then we're going to talk about some of the planning options that we investigated. There's four themes, four lenses that we looked at. The first, of course, is environmental resilience, which comes as no surprise. This is a picture of the July flood and the high school. And you'll see how the building was like an island. I think it came within, was it 8 inches of the floor?
Yeah, the first floor.
And as everybody knows, the lower level was completely flooded. Thankfully, this happened in July and you were able to get ready in time for school. But imagine if it happened during the school year. It's interesting to note that Memorial Drive is not flooded. It's very consistent with the flood maps, turn out to be incredibly accurate. The second is enrollment trends, because that's always the foundational piece of a master plan. Are you growing? Are enrollment flats? And then, of course, aging facilities. The stock of schools in Vermont is quite old, and Montpelier is no different. And the buildings haven't been renewed. They've been maintained, but they haven't had a real renewal in quite a long time. So that's a factor. And then, the evolving pedagogy, the way education is delivered has changed over the years. The buildings haven't. And so what we're looking for is, are there any buildings that are really out of alignment with the way education is delivered? And so we'll talk about that as well.
So this is just a schedule showing what we've been up to, and we mercifully are right on schedule here, beginning of May, with a board presentation after delivery of the final report. So I'm happy to report that this project is on time and on budget. As the project manager, that's important to me.
Of course, we modified the schedule to make it accurate. So
Cam can say that.
no. But what I want to point out is that we did in November, we had a community workshop where we talked about the context. What were all the factors, these themes we were looking at, and got community input. And then we did a visioning workshop with a group to talk about what should be the guiding principles of the master plan. We'll talk about that in a minute. So there was quite a bit of information gathering, that we visited all the schools, and quite a bit of learning as well, because the flood regulations in Montpelier are new, and so we were learning about them, and we're here to talk to you about how they impact future planning in the district. So first lens, enrollment projections. These are the last 10 years, going back to 2015. And you could see it's pretty flat. There was a little bit of a rise around 2020, and then it dipped back down So, this is, like I said, a very foundational document to planning. And so one of our recommendations is that you have enrollment projections done, a study done that tries to look at the next 10 years. And some districts do that themselves, some hire outside consultants. It's a little bit of a dark art in terms of how, how it's done, and but it's important because it's the basis for so much of the planning. So that's one of our recommendations, and that's the way the report is organized. For those who've read it, we have findings and recommendations, and we're going to follow that same format for this presentation.
So the facilities conditions generally, these facilities were built, the first structure was built in 1854. The last structure was built in 1957. So that's a little on the older side in general, and it's an interesting assortment of buildings. The chart on the right is a kind of a snapshot comparison matrix, and we use these like heat maps so that we can see kind of how the buildings stack up against each other. And it's a pretty simple metric. If it's red, it's that space either doesn't exist or there's some kind of failure. If it's yellow, it exists, but it's either undersized or it needs work. And if it's green, it exists and it's in good condition. So I think it more or less speaks for itself. And there's you could quibble a little bit. I think some people could have a slightly different opinion about certain things, but generally we feel pretty good about these assessments.
I'll take the next one.
Yeah, why don't we save them to the end and then let the guys.
We wanted to just touch briefly on the status of the PCB testing. Our understanding is that Union and Main Street have been tested, and to be clear, the testing is air testing. What the state is testing is are there PCBs in the air above an actionable level? They're not testing material testing. If they do find that they are actionable levels, then they start testing materials to figure out where it is. And when they do start, if you do find PCBs in materials, then you don't have the luxury of waiting until you do a project. You have to remediate it in a timely fashion and file it with the EPA. The high school is, I believe it's underway. The testing's underway. And, basically PCBs were used in a series of products, mostly in caulk to keep it plastic and pliable, but unfortunately it leaches out of the caulk and into nearby materials such as block or brick, sometimes even into soil. Sometimes we find it in epoxy materials. And so if Montpelier High School comes back and there's no issues, it doesn't mean you don't have PCBs in your buildings. It just means they're not in the air. So when you start to do a major project, like I know the windows at Main Street Middle School and Union Elementary School need to be replaced, we see that quite often is because the caulk on the windows might have had PCBs in it, leaches into nearby materials. Could be an issue, we don't know. But I just want to say that when you pass the state test in terms of it's really just air, it's not materials. It's not bulk, what they call bulk testing. So we just wanted to make sure that was clear.
So we want to talk about recommendations for budgeting for facilities. We've gotten some information from the state as they've been exploring a construction aid program. They have unearthed recommendations from the American Physical Plant Administrators group, that's or the Association of Physical Plant Administrators, which actually focuses on educational facilities. And their recommendations are actually kind of similar to the ones you get when you buy a home. You know, you buy a home and they tell you you should plan on spending about 2% of the purchase price every year on maintenance. And of course, I'm my own custodian. So the numbers that they recommend is a 1% of the current replacement value for maintenance and operations. That's custodians, salaries, cleaning materials, kind of just keeping the place maintained in terms of custodial work. They recommend 2% of current replacement value being budgeted annually for replacement of equipment and repairs in kind as you're moving along. You sometimes need to replace a kitchen hood or a piece of equipment in a classroom. And then they recommend that if you're going to do capital renewal, which is you're going to do a big construction project and you're going to modernize the building, that you would budget out 4% of current replacement value. And these numbers are far in excess of what people have historically been budgeting, and I'll acknowledge that. And it's not unique to this district. But here's a chart which shows what some of the numbers are, and they're big numbers and they're scary. I would point out that that the line where it says annual recommended maintenance budget of 3%. That's kind of the line that would be, you're keeping your buildings completely up to date and managing all the issues. That's this line right here. Yeah. And I would point out that the numbers that you are budgeting, those were good numbers in 2019. It's
not trying to be funny, Jim.
It's actually meant, well, it's meant to be a comforting statement in some ways, although it's uncomfortable because the cost of construction has ballooned. It's just mushroomed over the last 4 years since COVID. And so the current replacement value and associated cost of repairs to fix things or replace things has also gone up. So it's going up faster than we can keep pace.
And I think two of the recommendations, one is you're not going to be able to budget your way out of your facility issues. You're not going to be able to fund them in your capital budget because it's just too much money. So you're going to have to consider other ways of funding large capital renewal projects, like the windows, I know are an issue in both the Main Street Middle School and Union Elementary School. And that's probably, I don't know, is Andrew here? Was it like 4 million for both?
Well, getting pretty close.
Yeah.
Close to 300 windows, over 300 windows.
So that's a reality. The other piece is that I was on the task force that helped write the recommendations for school construction program, and they are using this APPA guidelines. The feeling is that to be eligible for school construction aid, that districts have to demonstrate they're on a path towards sustainable funding of their capital budget. And they're currently, this is the only benchmark that has been discussed. So the other recommendation is to, and I know we're saying this in the face of this whole budget strife, but to consider budgeting more or getting on a pathway to budget more to take care of your buildings, because it's based on these recommendations and also based on that this is likely going to be included in a school construction aid program, and it's just a heads up. So this is another heat map just showing some of the features of the building spaces when we talk about educational alignment. You'll see that some red by the auditoriums. Main Street Middle School, for example, doesn't have one. I would say the in general, the buildings are reasonably aligned with the educational program they're trying to deliver, with the exception, and this is a big exception, of the Main Street Middle School. A middle school concept is based on teaming, and the ideal middle school has spaces that build the sense of team and build a sense of community with the team. Usually those classrooms, so if you have 4th, 6th grade classrooms, they're together. There might be a common room. The Main Street Middle School, being a high school designed in 1907, doesn't have those kind of spaces, doesn't allow those kind of spaces created. It's fighting the alignment between the concept of a middle school and that building is not there. And along with that, a lot of the spaces are too small. The art rooms are too small. The library's too small. And as we know, there's no auditorium. There's no performing arts space at all. So of your portfolio of buildings, we would say that one is in terms of that lens of educational alignment, is the least aligned. So one of the recommendations is, as you look long-term, is considering the replacement or major renovation of the middle school. And we'll talk about that more when we get to the planning options.
So this exhibit shows the schools here in the district and an overlay of the FEMA floodplain information. And of course, July is all too evident in our recollection here in memory, and shows the real significance of flooding. Other areas have tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes. In Vermont, we do get flooding. And as David said, it's pretty accurate to the maps because it's based on elevation. And not only are construction costs rising, but floodwaters are rising. We're seeing more intensity of rain events, longer, and more frequency of flooding beyond what was historically predicted. The blue on these plans is the 100-year flood, or theoretically could happen a 1% chance every year. We've had that now 2 times in the last 12 years. And the orange is the 500 or 0.2% chance of flooding. And you can see that in both of the Montpelier images. The Roxbury image doesn't actually have mapping of the 500 years, just FEMA doesn't include that, but I would expect that we're in it. All 3 schools in Montpelier are touched by at least the 500-year flood. And of course, as we've seen in the photographs, the high school is completely surrounded by it. The flooding that we had in July at 8 inches below the first floor is just about the 100-year flood. Speaking of things changing, I have a couple other things are changing. One is the Montpelier flood regs. When I wrote this report, it had changed 3 times since July. And I decided before coming down today, I better check it again. And it's changed 3 times again in the last couple of months. I don't think anything major or significant, but one important thing to note that's included in the regulations is a designation of critical facilities. And critical facilities are basically defined as structures that, if destroyed or damaged, have the potential to cause disruption of vital socioeconomic activity. Critical facilities include government-built facilities, category 2 and 4 buildings. And based on all 3 of those determinations or designations, public schools fit into critical facilities. And at least in Montpelier, the requirements are to flood-proof those facilities to the 500-year flood elevation plus 2 feet. And we can go over what that means in more detail. If you're just continuing to use the building, there are no requirements to flood-proof. But if you are making substantial improvements, which is improving more than 50% of the market value of that building, you are required to bring it up to current standards. Or more importantly, which is kind of the ticking clock here, is if you continue to experience what's called substantial damage, and that is cumulative. So the costs incurred to repair, and these are the total costs, even though they're funded by FEMA in many cases, the cost to repair from past flood damage starts to accumulate. And if that reaches 50% of the market value, presumably the requirement is to flood-proof the building. And we can get a little more into what that would mean a little later on.
And I just want to point out that in the previous slides, we were talking about the current replacement value when we were talking about budgeting. That's the cost of if you had to go out and rebuild the school from scratch. This this flood national flood program insurance program uses market value, so it's very, very different, and we don't know what the market value is. And that's something in our recommendations is that at some point the district will need to get appraisals on all the properties to understand what that is, because as you're doing projects, you could very well trigger having to comply with the FEMA regulations by going over the 50% mark based on the market value. So we wanted to talk specifically, there are parts of each building that touch the 500-year floodplain. The basement of Union Elementary School, the cafeteria and kitchen of the middle school, and of course, the entire first floor of the high school. And you can see this exhibit here. And as we were talking about, if you look along the, I think I can use this pointer. This is Memorial Drive, is not in the 500-year.
Not in the 100 year.
Not in the 100 year, sorry. A little bit in the 5, but not in the 100. And so, and you could see that in that photo that we showed, that Memorial Drive was dry. And it pretty much looked like this. This mapping was pretty accurate. So one of the things we want to talk about is what to do about the high school. And that's kind of the big issue, right? And we'll talk about that very soon. But what we're recommending is considering building a new high school on the current site, but at a higher elevation. And we're going to talk about what it would mean to try and dry flood proof the building, and why we don't think that's a great idea. But we'll get that there in a minute. So before we talk about the design options, we wanted to just briefly touch on the guiding principles. And there were a couple that were very helpful in terms of our investigation. One was this walkable buildings that are integrated to the community. That came through loud and clear. People love that the kids could walk to school, that they could, that it was integrated into the community. The idea of a site that was remote, that you had to bus to, was very, was not supported. And also the idea that you could separate the playing fields from the academic spaces, and that you could just bus kids between those. I don't know if that made it into the guiding principles, but I know that was very much like talking with administration, and how a future facility could function was sort of a non-starter. So Cam, I'll let you talk about this map.
Yeah. So what we're looking at here is the white amoeba shape is everywhere in Montpelier where there is development, either housing or other. And if it's green on this map, it's a pretty steep slope because they've pretty much built out the town. There may be a little bit of land near National Life that's probably unattainable, and possibly Saban's pasture, which is, considered unavailable generally. So, and the circle is a 1 mile radius from city center. So what we're trying to do is look at where are there sites in town that you can walk to from the downtown core. And the high school site is kind of to the east of the center right there. So it's definitely walkable for most of the town to stay on that site. So we kind of focused there after we determined that it was feasible to rebuild on that site.
So Kevin, maybe you could help us talk a little bit. This is a project you did. This is a dry flood proofing project at a target in Hanover or West Lebanon.
Yeah, right over the bridge.
And what are we looking at, Kevin?
So, there's two ways to flood proof a commercial building or a non-residential building. One is certainly the most foolproof way is to raise the building, and that's probably what we'll talk about a little more later. And that's the measure that was employed at Waterbury for the state office complex. Another, if that's just not feasible, is to dry flood proof, and that's basically keeping the water out. And that's what you're seeing here. This is a large shopping plaza in West Lebanon, and the floor is about 4 feet below the floodplain elevation. It's right near where the Mascoma and Connecticut River join in. And during Irene, sure enough, there was 18 inches of water in this building. And this solution is basically reinforcing the entire perimeter of the walls. The backside of shopping centers have big CMU walls, and it's reinforcing all those to withstand the pressure of water. And then all these openings have this floodgate installed. It's tested, it's designed to work, but the challenge is if there's any one point of failure during a flooding event, water will find its way in everywhere to the building. So that's the shortcoming of these solutions. They did mobilize during July. They put the panels out. Fortunately, in this location, for them, the water didn't rise up to actually employ them. But
in the case of the high school, I think it's worth noting that even if you dry flood proof the building, which we think is probably prohibitively expensive, given how old the building is now and the work that it needs, even if you did dry flood proof the building, and even if all the dry flood proofing was successful and kept all the water out, if there was a flash flooding event during the school day, you'd have 400 students in the building. And where do they go? Do they go up on the roof? Do you get them out? Do you get them in rowboats? You
do have kayaks.
You don't, yeah, you don't, but people are, dissuaded from kayaking in the floodwaters. So to us, this seems like, not necessarily the most prudent way forward. I guess I'll leave it at that.
The other thing I would add to that is, I don't think I touched on this in my introduction to flooding, but right now, I mentioned that Montpelier, for example, would like critical facilities to be raised to the 500-year plus 2 feet. FEMA is reviewing all their flood maps and actually looking at updating the designation so that the 100-year actually rises to the elevation of the 500, just based on the increased intensity. So as we continue to have more, concentrated weather events, we'll be seeing those maps change over time.
So one of the ideas that arose as a result of all of this information that we gathered and learning was the idea of raising a section of the site along Memorial Drive, creating an access point from Memorial Drive and Bailey, and And then keeping the parking and the playing fields low, which is a very similar strategy in regards to Waterbury. And if you remember the photo that we saw, the parking lots were completely flooded. The building was fine. We can get 2 feet above the 500-year floodplain on this side of the site. And you can see dashed in gray here or shaded the existing high school. So one of the features of this approach is that you could do this work, it would be designed in a way, this is just a very early concept, but it would be designed in a way such that the high school could remain functional. You could do this work and then move the kids to a new facility and take down the high school. One of the things about the flood proofing that we just showed was that, it would take far longer than a summer to dry flood proof the building, cost millions of dollars, and you'd have to find a place for all the kids and teachers to go while you did that work. We haven't done a facility evaluation of the building, but the last time it had major work done was in, I think, 91 was the last major addition. And sometimes we use the analogy of an old car. You have an old car, gets you to work, and then it starts not to become reliable. Maybe the air conditioning doesn't work anymore. Maybe it never had air conditioning. And at a certain point, it needs a major renewal, and you start to ask yourself, is this the best idea? Is this the most prudent use of your money to invest in an old facility that was built in 57 and hasn't really been updated since 91, and has all these issues related to the floodplain? So we offer this for your consideration.
We should note that also this site does have room. You could, in stages, also do a middle school addition in the future, because there happens to be enough room on this site for both of those schools to move to. And I think, there's quite a bit of athletic field usage anyway from the middle school, and it's in that walkable zone. So it kind of ticks those boxes as well. So it's just for consideration.
Yeah, I would add, I'm not sure what architects were thinking in the 50s and 60s, but I've seen tons of schools that are turned at 45 degrees to the street and plopped right in the middle of the parcel, which makes planning around them inefficient. I worked with Andrew quite a bit trying to find places for the track and other fields, and this site, there's just kind of a lot of less efficient spaces. So you can see that organizing the school buildings right along Memorial does kind of reorganize and create a site that's more efficient as well.
Finally, we wanted to conclude the planning options with just a brief discussion of a merger with Washington Central, because that has been something that's been discussed over the years, and we did some quick analysis, and the current capacity of classroom capacity, and this is you can see the asterisks and the double asterisks. At U32, it assumes every classroom is being used as a classroom with an occupancy of 30 square feet per student with no cap per class size. We all know that school districts have guidelines for class sizes. So, in some cases, when there was a large classroom, it could have 32 kids in it or something like that. So this is a very mathematical calculation, and it assumes all the classrooms are being used as classrooms. We all know that, special ed and other support services often take over classrooms for other uses. But based on that simple capacity calculation, it does appear that there is sufficient space to accommodate the high school students, but not the middle school students. And of course, we have different grade configurations as to what is middle school between the two districts. So, it's obviously complicated, but we wanted to just address that in the report because we know somebody's going to ask, well, why don't we just move the kids up to U32? And the answer is it's not that simple. So just to summarize and wrap up, these are some of the recommendations that we talked about. Commissioning an enrollment projection study, consider funding options for substantial facility projects such as bonding, consider increasing capital budget consistent with APPA recommendations, getting the Montpelier facilities appraised, and then beginning planning for both short-term and long-term adaptation to the flood situation. One would be, what do you need to do in the short term? And then long-term, what's the best long-term strategy, especially in regards to the high school. And I think, there's an opportunity, as we showed, there is room for the middle school to, in a very long-term plan, consider replacement of the middle school. So at this point, that concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you. Very excellent presentation, a lot of good information. Questions? Right.
Are you saying that removal of the windows at Union and MSMS could shake out some PCBs that would change the values in the air that would happen after potential testing?
I don't know that I can answer whether that would put PCBs in the air, but when you go to do the window projects, you will need to test the materials in and around the windows, including the caulk and any block or brick that's near it and the soil. And if you if they find that, then the removal of those materials and the windows becomes a hazmat project. So just like an asbestos project, you have to plastic it off. You have to do negative pressure. They wear those white suits. They come in. It's a special contractor. It's not your regular contractor. So, but I don't believe, and because of that, it would not become airborne because they would have it all environmentally controlled.
I have three more, if that's all right. Yeah, go for it. The drawing of the fields in the floodplain, the district over the last 2 or 3 years has had a lot of interest in especially upgrading our track facilities, and the community has pushed back. How could you ever do something in a floodplain? Can you talk a little bit about what happens to a well-constructed field and or track facility when it floods?
Yeah, very good question. And one that I think requires a little more research, honestly. Athletic facilities we see designed and installed in a huge range of conditions and qualities, anywhere from artificial turf with under drains and E-layers and certain materials all the way down to have it perform at the highest level to, basically improve farm fields. And I think that final design of fields in the floodplain should take that into account. And I think you can certainly have a track. It can be a rubberized track. You just have to know that it's going to be certain cleaning required. Things that would silt in. For example, I'll give you an example. When we did the Waterbury project, you had the historic buildings, we had the new building, the parking, and beyond that was farm fields. And the state really pushed to have innovative stormwater treatment to treat all of the water, and those would have been out in the farm fields. And we do those, we do gravel wetlands, we do bioretention areas, but knowing that they would be exposed to siltation regularly, we proposed a much simpler solution, just grass swales. So I don't know that I would propose athletic fields with very expensive artificial turf systems. I don't know that I would propose under drains that help dewater fields, but that could be silted in. So I think that would have to be considered for sure.
Best approach might not be the most expensive approach.
Exactly. Yeah. You might save some money on your fields, but know that they're not going to be the highest performing fields. Yeah, it's a performance issue. And as you saw this summer, there's going to be some maintenance required after the flooding.
The next question is the footprint of the high school and the middle school. Did you envision those being multi-story buildings?
Yes.
How many stories?
I believe there were two stories. Yeah.
Could go 3, but not unnecessary.
2 could do it.
Yeah.
That's good to know. And then what is the practical reason for getting the buildings appraised as they currently?
So the trigger is when you do 50% or more of the appraised value or the market value. So
And an upgrade.
yeah, and it's cumulative. So it includes the money that was spent on the high school this past summer. And it doesn't matter, as Kevin was saying, whether you paid for it or FEMA paid for it, insurance paid for it. So at a point, you'll hit a trigger, and then you'll have to, according to the regulations, dry flood-proof the building. And or is it dry flood-proof? Yeah. So you'd want to kind of know where you stand with this issue.
I think this jumped out at me. The market value piece jumped out at me because, we were working with the Danville School and they were facing some pretty heavy renovation needs, to the tune of 30 or $40 million. And the current replacement value for that building was probably in the neighborhood of 45 or $50 million, what it would have cost to rebuild new today. But the property had only been appraised for $4 million. And it's because it's a unique occupancy type schools. And, the market value for a school building that's 70 years old or more is somewhat less than it would cost, substantially less often than it would cost to replace the facility. So we don't know what the market value is because it changes all the time and there are all kinds of different factors. And it is a nice parcel, to be honest. It's also in the floodplain, so it's going to have limited use and it's going to be highly regulated. So the market value piece, we don't know. Is it 5 million? Is it 10 million? Is it less? Is it more? A commercial appraiser should find that out so that you know how much money you can spend on projects before this gets triggered. Because you could get pretty far down the planning route, and windows and a roof might be enough to trigger. We don't know, and I'm not trying to claim that it is. It's just that's a key piece for you all to have moving forward.
So we might need an RFP for appraisal maybe before the Windows project, or
different buildings. Yeah. This is my question. Does it have to be from a flood? Like, does it have to be repaired from a flood, or is this just any discretionary repair or improvement we choose to make? Is that what's accumulated in this calculation?
It's any improvements in the facility are counted against what's called substantial improvement of 50%. And keep in mind, the idea is the federal government through this regulation is trying to dissuade owners from adding value to properties in the floodplain without also mitigating for the flood damage.
And
No, so there are 2 specific categories in the Montpelier regulations. One is that substantial improvement, which is when you intend to make improvements, an addition, an upgrade, the windows, re-roof. The other is substantial damage, and that is the same threshold, 50% of market value, and it's money that you didn't want to spend. It's money like you had to spend this summer to repair damage from floods.
And that counts even for work that might be seen as just kind of maintenance, because obviously, you replace a roof because the roof is leaking and the roof is done. That seems like kind of common maintenance, even though it can be very expensive, as opposed to we're going to add a new wing or we're going to, retrofit it so it's better.
I think that's a great question. I don't have the exact answer to that yet. It is substantial improvement. So I think it would require a little more review to see if something that's clearly a maintenance repair would fit under improvement or not. I think generally it is considered, but I think it needs further review to clarify that. It's something I can look into.
Kevin, when's that clock start ticking?
So
You can't hear it?
I'm hoping it's silent right now, but
I don't have the full definition here, but there's some I have an abbreviated one, and couple things. Substantial improvement in abbreviated note includes improvement and repair costs. So I'd want to look into that in the full text. Substantial damage is repair from flooding, etc. And repetitive loss is flood-related damage 2 times within 10 years. So I think the clock is ticking since July.
right.
And if there was more flooding and damage within the next 10 years, it would be cumulative. I think after 10 years, maybe the clock resets for that damage. I think that we've had a lot of discussion who regulates this. We could spend a lot of time talking about floods, and flood regulations, but it's regulations that come down from the federal government through the National Flood Insurance Program. It's regulated by municipalities who are forced to regulate it if they wish to have insurance benefits for their entire community. So it's really the zoning and floodplain manager in Montpelier that would regulate this. And I think the substantial damage one, in terms of who's tracking that, is a good question. The substantial improvement is if you go and get a building permit to do repair or expansion, that would certainly trigger someone
Which we have to
tracking
do,
that.
yeah.
Probably a good thing would be even if someone else is tracking it, for you also to track it. So that you know where you think you are.
Yep.
I'm sure Andrew's doing that right now.
Yeah.
Nice spreadsheet with Christina.
It's been around, the substantial improvement. I had not seen the substantial damage before. I don't know if that is new in FEMA and then worked its way into the Montpelier regulations. But the substantial damage has been around. I think it's not always enforced and regulated, but I think certainly in communities that receive repeated flood damage, it's going to be more and more regulated. That Target project, unfortunately, the owner that bought the building didn't do their due diligence and realized that it was in the floodplain, and then needed to work very carefully with the city to address the flood mitigation because it was 4 feet below the floodplain.
Probably this notion of, this is layman's, I should probably not say this because I don't really know, but I speculate that we're talking about market value because it's an insurance program. And they're trying to dissuade you from having repeated claims.
Yeah.
So was the answer that our repairs this summer aren't necessarily starting?
They are.
They are.
They are starting under the substantial damage clock. I suppose you could call it the substantial improvement with the caveat that I need to confirm what repair. I think those two things are the same, but I just want to differentiate that substantial improvements are usually things you initiate, and substantial damage is something you're reacting to.
Do you have any estimate? Do you have any estimate on the cost of the plan to move the high school to the kind of south side of the southwest side? Right. Yeah. What was it? It was I don't know.
It's so to move to build a new high school on the site, we did get a cost estimate from a professional independent cost estimator.
Based on the plan that you
based on,
saw.
yeah, the plan that you saw, plus an outline specification. And we are looking at construction in probably 2 years, and the construction costs were estimated around $78 million. And you would need to add probably 20 to 25% for what we call soft costs. The construction of a building costs more than just what you pay the contractor, because you also have professional fees, architects, engineers, lawyers, permits, moving costs, and other logistical costs that come along with a big construction project.
Furniture.
Furniture, probably.
Is that the high school?
Just
the high
the high school.
Yeah. And there's some more information in the report in one of the appendixes. So you can see kind of some of the breakdown there. But yeah, we're in a world of, I think Burlington High School is being constructed right now. It's about $800 plus a square foot. They started over a year ago. Construction cost is escalating in Vermont about 4 or 5% per year.
It was actually 15 to 20% year over year over the pandemic.
Yeah,
It's
over the
been- it's
pandemic.
been much
And
higher.
you're not going
The-
to see
the-
that go back down.
The
Probably.
professional cost estimators are telling us it's 4%. We are observing higher than 4% in Vermont, mostly because usually professional cost estimators base their estimates on competitive bidding, where you can get 3 contractors to compete on pretty much every major trade. We don't have that luxury in Vermont. Sometimes we're lucky to get 1 bidder. And there are just not enough trades contractors in Vermont to meet the need, so they're charging what they can. So costs are higher here.
This estimate tracks with other estimates we've gotten and tracks with Burlington and Woodstock, different projects that are, either on their way or trying to get started. So but bear in mind, we've escalated the cost for 2 years, and every year that which is very ambitious to say construction will start in 2 years, but we just picked that. It was just a more of a thought exercise. Often it takes 3 or 4 years to get a project going of this scale. So cost escalation, we don't know what it's going to be over the next 4 years, but it will add. The longer you wait, the more it'll cost.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I found that, sorry, I found that cost in the appendix, and it looked like all together with the soft costs and the actual construction costs, it was about $110 million. I'm wondering if that means if we were to then add like a middle school wing, would that be half that much again? You were saying there were some cost savings, or because they might share some of the expensive parts of the construction?
Yeah, we would, if that was part of the plan, future middle school, then we would plan the kitchen and cafeteria and, all of those core facilities in a way that could be shared. The ones that could be shared would be shared. So and you wouldn't have to rebuild more playing fields or anything like that. So it would be substantially less. And it's also, because of those reasons, sharing building facilities and then sharing site facilities. So it's would be far more economical than, for example, building a middle school on a greenfield site somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. And you ended the presentation by saying you are, I guess, recommending that would be very long term from now, a rebuilding a new middle school. Can you give a ballpark number of years you mean when you say long term, very long term from now?
Well, honestly, it would make there are you could make an argument that it would make sense to do it all at once, right? A combined middle school, high school, because then you're paying in today's dollars, not in dollars 10 years from now. But we just thought, the focus was on the high school. That's the critical need. So that's why we were saying the middle school could be future. And as far as the time horizon, that would really be up to the district.
Okay. And then did you have was there any other land like up at the college or out at the old Elks Country Club that you looked at and just said, no, that's not the right place for the high school? Or was this really the only location that you considered?
Well, because of the walkability factor, the Elks Club was ruled out. We did look at Vermont College, and because recently several of the properties were just sold, it was determined that they just weren't available. But we did look at could you place a high school up on the green somewhere, and the other factor was that it would be separated from the playing fields, which was looked at as unfavorable.
Yep, I understand that. Okay.
I think the high school did fit up at the site, although you'd have to demolish several of the buildings that are there in order to erect it. But then, yeah, you have the separation of the fields. So that's the kind of, we stopped there.
Understood. And then you mentioned on the last slide there that one of your recommendations is to do short-term mitigation against flooding at the high school, but I didn't see any examples of what that would be.
Is some of that already underway?
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew could speak to that, but I'll share what I'm aware of, which is, electrical panels that are down in the boiler room have been moved up above the floodplain elevation. The flood doors could be installed in the boiler room, and other measures, looking at where water made it into the lower level, and maybe not rising to the standard of the full FEMA requirements, but taking measures to mitigate, short-term measures to mitigate similar flooding to what we saw in July.
So things that wouldn't necessarily keep water out of the building, but might protect critical assets in the building?
Yeah, things that would keep water out under similar flooding conditions to what we experienced in July. So we think, there's a bulkhead over near the auditorium where water got in. There are various pipe penetrations and cracks in the foundation or old holes that could be filled. As I mentioned, flood doors, if you haven't, you should get a tour of the lower levels. It's pretty cavernous, so the water can move through it pretty freely, but the boiler room itself could be protected. So those are all measures that could be done. As I mentioned, they don't meet Montpelier's requirements to be substantially impermeable to water up to 2 feet above the 500-year flood. So as floods get higher, if that trigger was met, these measures would not address that requirement.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
I also wanted to just share, I can't remember if any other board members managed to make it to the community forums. They were incredibly well facilitated, but not a whole lot of community participation. We didn't have that many members of our community there. And especially because walkability is coming through loud and clear from the folks who were there, I would urge us as a board to dig a little bit more deeply into the question of that, because we certainly have a lot of members of our community who can't actually walk to the high school right now, or the middle school, or the elementary school. And I don't want walkability as a guiding principle to be something that keeps us from making hard decisions we need to make in the future, because it, showed up in the community forums that, like I said, I'm really glad we held them, and I thought you all did amazing, but I think, we didn't have, we should just, I want to vet that as a guiding principle a little further before we have to make some hard decisions. Because right now we're looking at an incredible cost to the community to build a brand new high school in this location. One that I can't even imagine where the money will come from. And if it's largely rooted in that, I really want us to interrogate that question.
It's probably worth noting at this point that it's probably worth noting that it's not substantially cheaper to build the same footprint elsewhere in the community.
Yep.
So that's, that's neither here nor there perhaps, but for what it's worth, we entertained a few other sites like the North Branch Nature Center, Sabin's Pasture. We did think about the Elks Club. Interestingly, the Elks Club got ruled out on another project because the developable area wasn't big enough to include fields and stuff. So if we looked at that more seriously here, it might, unless we're scrapping the golf course, I guess. So
I think there might be a couple percent of the overall budget related to flood mitigation, new fill being brought in to elevate the building. But as you say, everything else is the same cost wherever it is. Although sites that aren't flat, like some of the ones you mentioned, would have additional costs to cut and fill and level out an area to have a school, a parking and fields.
it won't be half as much.
We recently, we've been working with the Milton School District, and we've been working at the Herrick Avenue School, which is a large elementary school and middle school for 1,100 students. And we did two schemes. One was a renovation project where we demolished part of the building and did an addition and renovated, a good portion of the building. And then the other was a brand new build, and the brand new build was 6% more. And the school board at the time was sort of like, this is a no-brainer. Why would we work on our old car and spend 94%? We could spend 6% more and get a new car and get a new building, get a year faster. And one of the things about these gnarly renovation projects, because we went through this when we did the Winooski project, is it's absolutely a nightmare for the students and the educators who work in the building, because they're working in what feels like a war zone. It's noisy, there's disruption, they're having to relocate their classes, and when you build one really important feature not to, I think, be overlooked, is when you do build new, you avoid that. And when it's done, kids can move over, and educators as well. So, and the cost difference, as I said, is not, I think if we were to do a complete full-bodied renovation of the high school and flood-proofed it, we probably would be getting at numbers. I'm not saying they'd be the same, but they wouldn't be substantially different from new construction.
Just going back to the U32 option, I just want to kind of get a sense of how deeply you went into it. So my understanding is U32 would have the capacity to take Montpelier High School students plus their current configuration, correct? So Montpelier High School students plus the current 7 through 12 of.
It appears so and this was a very, we were given floor plans from U32, and they had done the capacity calculation, and they had said, here's all the classrooms, and they just divided it by 30, and we use those numbers. So it would require a much more in-depth analysis to really confirm. But initially, yes, that's what we're saying.
And then there were a variety of other problems, but I think we're all kind of aware of, having to do with,
the configuration and
the configuration of the two districts, and obviously for that to happen, there would have to be some sort of merger, and we'd have to work those out anyways. yeah, the answer is probably no, but did you look at all, I mean, because U-32 is not walkable from Montpelier, but it arguably is bikeable, and there's a fairly good bike path system, which could be improved, obviously, probably not for February, but certainly for now. Did you look at possibilities of that at all, just in terms of making kind of non-car access to some remote places a little easier?
We did not.
Suppose we were to abandon the high school site, would it have value to some other entity? And what do you think they would do with it?
Being in a 500-year floodplain or a 100-year floodplain.
Currently zoned for school only, I believe.
I'm not sure that.
Yeah, I think I looked at the zoning map and it's a unique zoning classification that could probably be adjusted, but yeah, it's in the floodplain. So anyone who bought the property would have to also comply with the same requirements. So they'd have a high bar to move in. It's hard to imagine I mean, it's got a lot of value as it is right now for the school, just continuing in use. So it's probably more valuable to the district as the asset that it is, and being a large parcel in town that could be used in the future. Like there's a path forward than it would be to others. I'm speculating.
But Main Street's a different story. Main Street
Yeah,
is not zoned for
we were wondering about the use of Main Street Middle School as housing, because we've seen many schools retrofitted, rehabbed for housing, and it's a pretty good fit. It's, the parking, the obviously there's a dire need for housing everywhere in Vermont, and so we think that would be, if you were to, that would probably attract developers for that use. I don't know that the high school site, it'd be an interesting conversation with people who do that kind of development, like, what kind of value would it have and for what use? I don't know.
And is it the property of the district or the property of the city, the high school site?
district.
Okay.
And the middle school.
Mm-hmm.
What are the risks of doing nothing? Yeah,
Yeah, right.
I mean, does that trigger anything other than a bigger, more expensive cleanup?
Well,
or do we get to a point where we're going to be forced out of that building?
Well, I think probably the biggest risk is you have the flood, you have another flood, and it doesn't happen in July, and it happens during the school year, and you don't have a school. And there's no downtown Macy's. Yeah. So I think the biggest risk is you don't have a school you can use for months and months, and you have to figure out what to do.
I mean, is there a point, kind of given where the regulations are, where it could be, say it's hit by 2 or 3 floods quickly, where it just could be too expensive from an insurance or regulatory standpoint to go back in?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is this provision of substantial damage, and it's 50% of the fair value. I have a little bit of a difficult time seeing, a regulatory body enforcing that, but it's there. And I think the stick is, if it's not enforced, the municipality could risk losing its flood insurance through the NFIP. And then, so if it is triggered, then the question is, what's involved in doing this flood proofing? And we talked a little bit about how hard it is to quantify that and the impact it would have on the school, but it's the elevation, just for reference, is I think 3.5 feet, 43 inches above the existing floor. So everything below the floor, that subgrade space we talked about, the boiler room, and then as you start to go up, you have challenges, because the higher the water you're designing against, the more the hydrostatic pressure exerts, not just on the walls, but on the slab that's designed not for uplift, but for down loads. So, it's certainly many millions of dollars. I don't know how many. And then there's the disruption factor that David planned. I think what I would be worried about is, one, the unplanned impact to being able to hold school in a flooding event, and then two, the unplanned reaction to it if there hasn't been at least a plan in place, to have to either repair and or change directions rapidly without a plan.
Just to put a little flesh on the bones for the board in evaluating, what we wanted to do was try and quantify the cost of dry flood proofing the school. And as we got into it, as we got the final determination of what the elevation of flood proofing would have to be, we realized it's a very complicated project because the flood proofing elevation is actually above the bottom of the window openings. It also includes mechanical equipment called unit ventilators, which are in several spaces, which have openings below the windowsill. So it's not just the building envelope being flood proofed into an inverse bathtub. It's also a ventilation project. It's taking the brick off the entire building. It's reinforcing the backup wall, which is built of concrete blocks every 4 feet with rebar and grout. It affects not just the windows, but the ribbon window infill. That building was originally a mid-century, I won't call it a masterpiece, but it was a mid-century exemplar, and it had full ribbon windows. Those ribbon windows were infilled. So the flood proofing would impact the bottom of that opening as well. So we came to the realization that this is really a separate project. And it's very complicated, and it seems like it is going to be a lot of money just without going into doing drawings and details and getting a cost estimate for that particular scope of work to try and put our arms around it. We know that it's definitely in the millions, and it's time consuming.
No such thing as a light fair meeting anymore.
I know.
I'm
so sorry.
It's low-hanging fruit topics anymore. So I'm curious, there's obviously a lot of sticker shock. There's like a lot of doom in this conversation on the wake of really hard conversations. And I'm also reflecting on, schools that I've taught in that have been next to Superfund sites, or the school that I grew up going to, which was located next to a swamp. And when I think about the historical locating of schools over time, they are oftentimes cited in really inopportune, sometimes high risk areas. So I'm curious, with all of this information, it sounds like this is not the only district you're working with. Is there, or do any of us know if there is an impetus to look at this at like a state level, such that we can be proactively planning?
You can't pass the mic, David.
So because this is like really alarming. This is like a really jarring dollar value that I can't imagine us absorbing. And the fact that like this fire could now be going off in terms of like this alarmed crisis high anxiety feeling for lots of different school districts. It seems like we must be talking with each other regionally on a statewide basis. And I'm just curious like how aware the state is of the conversations happening. I'm curious about the initiative around the state, the construction, aid program. It would be great to think that these things were the result of planning and response to knowledge and information. So if you can fill in any of those blanks, because it feels like we really need collaboration and we really need information. We're a small state with a limited tax base, and this feels really big.
That's very well said. And I can offer, I was on the state task force for the school construction aid, and I can offer what I understand. The state understands that there's a huge problem. It's across the state. It's not just Montpelier. The kind of numbers we're talking about, it's a little different here because you have this the flooding issue and the trigger of the 50%. So you might, you have to, you have extra factors, but every school district is dealing with these same issues of facility needs that far outstrip their ability to budget, aging facilities, facilities that are not aligned with education, and the total for the state was $6 to $7 billion of needs, facility needs,
And that was conservative.
and that's conservative. Yeah, that was.
Facilities without change.
Yeah, that was without changing them to align them with the educational program. And so one of the realizations and recommendations in the task force was that, we've got this really big problem. We have limited resources. We're not going to be able to fund every school project. And one of the bill that's in the, I think it's in the Senate right now, is H871, is a bill to start a planning grant program for districts and supervisory unions to start developing facilities master plans. So to start kind of get their arms around what's your plan? How are you going to attack this? How are you going to address this? And that is being considered as one of the eligibility requirements to get into the school construction aid program. So all this work you're doing is right on track. I should say also that, one of the recommendations is that school districts budget to take care of their buildings in a responsible way. And right now, the APPA guidelines are, the only thing the state really has been using as a guideline as to what's reasonable. So another eligibility requirement could be that a district is on a path at least towards adequately funding their capital budgets, because I think one thing the state's concerned about is, providing aid, construction aid to districts and then not having the assets maintained. So everything we're talking about is consistent with the task force recommendations and H871. There's a somewhat of a reluctance of the state to come up with a master plan for the whole state, or for they're really the approach is carrots and not sticks, right? To provide incentives to influence behavior in a way that's consistent with state policy, but not penalize districts. Just basically use carrots, money as carrots to get, the behaviors that, but, there's no state master plan for facilities. There's no big picture thinking. And in that regard, there are different acts that have been enacted over the years. And so it's kind of a patchwork quilt of state goals.
I do want to be mindful that we're almost at 25. Yeah, quick question. Why do we have Jill's question last? Because I know this is going to be a conversation. Oh, do you have more questions, Maya?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Lynn.
I'm curious. I know if we have a new building, it will be much more energy efficient than what we're dealing with now. And I'm wondering if you have any sense of what kind of savings that might provide for us in terms of the cost of paying for a new building.
Not at this time. We don't.
Okay, there's not like any general idea that you save 20% on energy if you get your building up to standards or whatever.
Well, I mean, we would at this point, our goal with every project is to design net zero energy buildings. So the goal would be to have it consume no energy, or to produce as much energy as it consumes over the course of the year, which I don't know what you're paying now, but that should be a substantial savings.
And then the only other comment I want to make in terms of U32 is I know you did a study for them too. And I guess what we need to find out is what condition their building is in, right? Like what would, if we talked about combining, what would that mean in terms of additional
When this
expenses?
company, Truex Collins didn't do U32 study. They're working with
Oh.
it with a different group. And I don't know if they're actual architects. I think they're a different type of group.
Okay. But I guess that would be a question we'd need to find out too, right? Like what would need to happen there
Yeah.
in terms of,
There are many questions that would need to be found out through a merger committee.
yeah.
And I think they have done a overall facilities review.
Capacity review.
Capacity review. And they're, I think, grappling with perhaps even more difficult issues that we have grappled with. But there would be a lot to talk about, but I think it's a conversation worth having. Jill.
I'll be quick, because my fellow board members asked some really good questions, like about I'm curious about the windows still in the PCB piece. I've been really looking forward to this for a really long time. I'm really excited about it. My affect is a little low because we're a little heartbroken after what we've gone through with what's happening with this building. So I apologize. It's nothing to do with your presentation. I just really wanted to thank you for providing us an objective and clear and realistic accounting of what we have, because that's how we're going to be able to make these smart decisions and try really hard to take the emotion out. I also feel a little vindicated because the middle school has always been something I've been very curious to hear what folks such as yourself would say. I live next to the middle school or pretty close to it, and I have my kid has gone through Union and the middle school, and now she's at the high school. So I've spent a lot of time in all those buildings. So I really want to encourage our community to really think about what we want for our kids and what's going to work to, consolidate our resources. And I do think that moving the middle school to the high school and having our high schoolers go to U32 or combining the buildings, just like you said, makes a lot of sense. I really think we need to start to think about that. One of the things we've wrestled with our budget lately is we also don't want to be so draconian that the few houses that people might be able to find for sale in Montpelier are not folks who would send their kids to the school. So we need to think really long-term and big picture. And then just lastly, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't put in a plug. I think you guys are also working with the Central Vermont Career Center, and I was the board's representative on that because we're part of their independent district. And they're looking for space too. So I love the idea of like our communities, like us and Washington Central and Central Vermont Career Center, like, all right, like we've got limited space and no money. Is there anything we can do since we're all trying to make changes at the same time? So I'll take that on for sure. But I just really wanted to, after the really challenging few months we've had, it's really incredibly helpful for us to make decisions that are not emotion-based, but are just fact-based. Like you gave us the facts, like them or not, these are the facts. And also I found your visuals really helpful. And lastly, I just say, I think, having, been in Montpelier during the flood, I can't think of anything that would be better to be in a floodplain than fields. It's that or parking lots, which we have plenty of those. So I actually don't have concerns about that. It seems like a very reasonable accounting. And my day job is I work in property tax. And so I do think that while our middle school is not great for the staff, it's not great for students, it's pretty awful for the exterior as far as what the kids have for, a playground, and the busing and walking in the morning is really dangerous. But for apartments or condominiums or something, it's a walkable, flat place really close to downtown Montpelier. And I do think it would be really valuable for that. So just thank you again. And sorry, I guess that wasn't short, but that's all.
Thank you, Joe.
What exactly was our flood? Was it a 100-year flood or a 5 or like a 200-year flood or somewhere in between?
250, 300.
Yeah. I was just trying to orient.
It was a 12-year flood because we had one 12 years ago.
It was at roughly elevation 524 to 524.5. And the 100-year flood is 523.8. So it was almost 9 inches above the 100-year.
How high is the 500?
500-year is 525.42.
Yeah, I
And
remember.
so you add 2 feet on that to get to the protected.
Which is very close to the actual floor elevation of the high school, right?
Yeah, it's about 3 inches.
It's about 3 inches. So just ways of thinking about it is that the floor level is roughly the 500-year.
When you look at the maps, it's not a much larger area when you get to 500, because I think.
Well, Montpelier goes.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, and the flood filled up all the flat parts of the city where all the development is.
Is the 500, 100 map being changed, or has it been changed recently?
I think it's in, wherever FEMA headquarters makes their decisions, they're in the process. Specifically for Montpelier-Roxbury, my recollection is several years ago, FEMA updated it, and actually, I think it was Barry appealed the process, and it took a lot longer than it normally. Well, it always takes long, but it took even longer. And so it has been updated, within the last 10 years. So it will be a while before it would get through its normal cycle. But what I understand in committees, FEMA is looking at its entire process, and based on the frequency of rain events and flooding, looking at redesignating either the elevations or the elevations to which protection must be made. I don't know the answer exactly. Most buildings need to be protected to the 100-year. The reason we talked about 500-year here is because it's a critical facility. I think what may be happening is FEMA is looking at all buildings needing to be protected to the 500-year.
Yeah, I know FEMA is doing a big redo, and I think that most of what's mapped as 500 years with climate change is more like 100-year floodplain in reality.
Well, this conversation reminds me of something that I feel is really important, which is developing a contingency plan in case the high school does flood again, not in July or in a way that takes a while to fix. I don't want the kids to go to remote. I don't want them to go to Berlin Mall. So, I'd like to put something together.
They can't go remote, so that's not an option with the Agency of Education. And they very well may go to the Berlin Mall because there's not many other options for us to get them there, get them anywhere.
U32 has capacity, it's sort of, just putting something together with them.
U32 did make it be known that they might have been available for the start of last school year. So that.
Yeah, so formalize that a little bit. Like, what would that look like to bring our students up there, and where would they actually have their classes? I don't, I think it's would be dumb to not prepare for that. And also have to prepare for the longer term stuff. So we really appreciate your input.
Yeah, no, this has been fantastic. Really excellent report. As informative as it is sobering. Kind of what I expected, but it's really good to have these facts out there because there's a lot of talking to the community, and not all of it is as informed as it will be with this report. And that's one of the reasons we did it. And it, I think, opens our eyes to kind of where we need to be looking in the future. So really appreciate it. It's a discussion we are going to continue to have, I think, pretty robustly, because we did have a narrow miss in July, and as Jake just alluded to, a few more inches of water at a different time of year, and we'd be in a very different situation.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
No, we're done with public comment, but you're definitely willing to email us or
about this that we're talking about.
Yeah, I know, but it's not an open public discussion, but
Well, you do realize that the 27 flood was in November?
Yeah.
November 3rd.
Yeah, no, we know that, and there was the 91 flood in Montpelier that was, I think, in No, it was a little later. It was during the spring melt. It was, I think, March. Yeah. No,
Irene was August.
Irene was, yeah. Irene was.
I do have a question about your blocks of color over here. Said there's something wrong with this arena, this auditorium. I'd like to know what that is.
Dave, I'm happy to take your question and then like after the meeting, or I could link up with you this week and then I could get it to these folks.
Do you have a copy of that block with the colors?
We can get a paper copy for sure.
Yeah. We can get a copy of the report to you.
I don't know what's wrong with the
Yep.
auditorium.
Yeah, no, we can get you a copy of the report. And then if you have any questions, you can, Chris and Rhett can can answer it or get an answer. All right. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, guys.
Go forward point of view, would this be something the facilities committee would now sort of?
Yeah, and I think we want to digest this and discuss this again. We have, Libby and I had a discussion with Megan Roy, who's the superintendent of the Wash Central District, and Florida Smith, who's the board chair, with a promise to start that conversation in spring.
They won't be ready for it.
I said, I've been waiting. They have not passed their budget yet. I have been waiting for them to get through that before I reach out, because I know they have a lot of hard decisions as well, including potential multiple school closings.
Which I don't think they're planning on voting for until next fall.
Yeah. I think we need to probably start the discussion before, or at least reach out before next fall. But we want to follow that up too, and kind of get board input on that, because, if you look at the figures, a possible merger definitely has some upsides, costs being one of them. And it's a constructive high school in a location that's on the edge of Montpelier. Costs both in terms of avoiding having to build a new high school or deal with, extreme damage to the current one. And also, as both our districts get smaller and the state puts additional pressures on us, there may be cost savings and educational gains. So big conversation there. Those are kind of the two things, but we will definitely keep this on the agenda and keep it with the facilities committee. And my thought is to have kind of a check-in, in a couple months or so, when we've had time to digest, get some feedback from the community, and maybe have an update on where the conversation with Wash Central is. We have one more agenda item before.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. We have one more agenda item, and that's the policy monitoring reports, which is C29, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and F2, non-discriminatory mascot and school branding. Do I have a motion to approve those two facility or policy monitoring report? They're not facility monitoring. Okay.
They're policy monitoring
reports. Yes.
You're monitoring facilities now.
Yes. Facilities on the mind. Do you have a motion to approve those two policy monitoring reports?
I move that we accept the policy monitoring reports.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Any discussion or questions? Not seeing any online. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion to adjourn. I'm going to make it.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Before we do, with respect to the budget passing yesterday and the vote that the board made a couple weeks ago to send elementary students from Roxbury to Montpelier, there are going to be, there are going to continue to be a lot of strong emotions for quite some time, and I just want to observe that in my experience. And I'm not sure exactly who I'm talking to, but in my experience, people often take some solace in finding blame or assigning blame. And in my experience, in reality is far more complex than that. You know, in this community, there are a number of folks who are essentially aging in place because they don't have another option. And when you're aging in place because you don't have another option, your residence is unlikely to produce children. And then when you don't have residences that produce children, it can become challenging to have a school. And I hope that folks in this community can kind of begin the process of healing. And I hope that our board and Montpelier can recognize that that process of healing is going to take a lot more than a couple months or even really a year. It might take many years. And that we should not take for granted that school starts in September and that healing is over. I think it's going to take a long time. And I think it's going to take intentional and compassionate work on the part of the board and the administration. And I want to put that work in, and I hope that our Montpelier residents recognize that process is going to take quite a bit of time, and that people will afford Roxbury community members the time that is necessary to go through that process of healing. And hopefully, all the talk of closure is premature because the building continues to be a resource of the district. And until there's a decision otherwise, that's the reality that we're sitting in. And there are opportunities, and we just need to find them. And I just want to say that.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, Rhett. And I also want to, I agree. I think the board has to be super intentional about for the next, several years. And I think throughout of making sure that we really respect this as two communities. And there's also a hope that when Roxbury students do go to UES, there might be the opportunity for attachments between the two communities that, may not be happening now. I mean, elementary school, I think having all the students start at one as an elementary school is a great opportunity for, friendships to development since kindergarten, because it can be tough to come in 5th or 6th grade to a group that's already very established. And same with parents too. I mean, there's a lot more parent connection at the elementary school level than there is when you get to middle school and high school and the students kind of become their own independent units. And I'm hoping that there's, some friendship and some kind of cross-community cultivation of relationships that happen because, parents of younger kids oftentimes tend to make friendships and to be more involved and to be more at, the soccer practices and the plays. So a lot of hurt and a lot of need for healing, and I think some opportunities for healing. And change is hard, but change also oftentimes produces some unexpected things, and some of those unexpected things can be wonderful. All those in favor of adjourning? Did we get a motion?
I made a motion. I don't think there was a second.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.